So one of the things that we want to put even more emphasis on when we are learning about the P of the product is branding. Because to brand or not to brand is a very important decision on the company's part. And it's actually a decision that it needs to make very early on and not always can change later on in the company's life. So one of the reasons is that a brand is basically the perception a consumer will have about the product. So if I want to create beliefs about the product and an attitude about the product, an image, and I want to differentiate it from competition, I probably must have a brand. So a brand is basically the company's promise to deliver specific set of features, benefits, and services and experiences. And the promise is that every time you buy that brand, you should experience the same quality, the same benefits, the same value. Now, without the brand name, the company cannot differentiate itself from competition, and the consumer will not be able to identify the product over other products that exist in the market. So if I don't brand, what might happen? I won't be able to build it up. I won't be able to promote it. However, it costs a lot of money to promote a brand, and it costs a lot of money to create a brand. Hence, when a company does not have a lot of financial resources, that might be one of the reasons they decide not to brand. The other reason why a company might not want to brand is that it cannot promise consistency. Maybe the quality of the product is sometimes high, but sometimes low. And finally, the products are not really easily differentiated. So, for example, milk is not brand because nobody can really differentiate the different types of milk. You do have, of course, the name of the farm that maybe the milk came from, but this is not really a brand. This is just a name of a product. Other types of products could be maybe screwdrivers or screws or nails that you buy in a handy store. Those are also products that really does not have any difference between other types of screws or other types of nails, and most of the time you don't even know who is the manufacturer of these products. So when do we want a brand? We do want a brand when the company wants to differentiate the products. If you want to identify your product as unique and different than competition, you must have a brand. Also, you will brand when you want to create an image. An image means that the reason people will buy your product is not necessarily because of the features or the attributes, but really because of the psychological value they get from the product. So Nike, for example, one might say that Nike's sneakers are not really different than Adidas sneakers or Puma sneakers. However, because each of those companies have a brand, most consumers will be able to tell you why the brand is different, even though the sneaker, the shoe itself, is probably performing sort of equal. And then a brand offers the consumer protection, meaning that when I buy a brand name, I feel that I have a company that supports me in case something goes wrong. This is a classic example is in the drug industry. Drugs like Advil, like Tylenol, those are brand names. Many pharmaceutical companies offer what we call generic brands. So they will offer a generic Tylenol or a generic Advil. They do not have the name Advil, they do not have the name Tylenol, but they have exactly the same medical components within the drug, and they usually will cost at least 30 to 50% less. However, many consumers prefer to buy the Advil and the Tylenol because they feel that they can trust this company and that indeed the quality of the ingredients within these medications will be consistent and will be of high quality. So when we want to brand, what are the different strategies or different decisions that we need to go through? So there are 4 steps one wants to think about when creating a brand. We will now go one by one. So the first is brand positioning. So brand positioning, we need to decide on 3 levels. One is we want to decide about the attributes. So what kind of positioning is the brand? Are we offering more for more? Or are we offering more for the same or same for more? So we need to make sure that the attributes of the product fit with whatever brand positioning we have. Then we need to think, well, what is the benefit? What is the reason that the consumers actually buy products from my company? We need to identify those benefits and make sure that the brand will carry that specific benefit. And then the beliefs and values. What are the beliefs and values that our brand will send out to consumers? Tom's Shoes, for example, if you recall, says that every time you buy shoes from their company, they will donate a pair of shoes in third world countries. So the brand needs to be now about social well-being and about benefiting others as well as benefiting the consumer. The next strategy or the next step is how do we select the brand name itself? How are we going to call our product? So now that we know what the product needs to stand for, what are the attributes, then you might want to choose a brand name that actually in the name has some idea about the positioning of the brand. For example, the gym that's called Curves, or Neutrogena, or Crispy Delight. All those are brand names that when you hear the name, you sort of understand what the brand is going to be about. And also, obviously, you want the brand to be easy to pronounce because you want it to be easily recognized and easily remembered, which is why many times the brand name will be short, like Tide, like Silk, like Gain, and so forth. Now, a brand name also have to be unique. You don't want it to sound like something else. So like Geico, like Lexus, those will be names that are different, Fandango. Then you also want to make sure that yes, the brand needs to say something about the product, but it also needs to be extendable. Meaning, what happens if Starbucks no longer sells only coffee? So if you recall, we discussed the idea that Starbucks changed their logo because the original logo said coffee on the logo. Once it says coffee, consumers will mostly associate Starbucks with coffee. But then Starbucks wanted to extend. They wanted to extend to other types of beverages, hot and cold. They wanted to extend into food. And that prevented them from doing so, hence they changed the logo. However, changing a brand name is much more difficult. So when you choose a brand, you want to choose a name that, yes, might say something about the product, but also can be applied to many other types of products. Then the other issue is you want it to be able to be translated into other languages. One example was that there was an automobile manufacturer that had a car that was called Nova, and they actually tried to market it in Spain. Now, Nova means that it's not going. It's not really a clever idea to call a car not going. Another example is in Israel, there's a successful shoe manufacturer that's called Nimrod. The problem is that in the United States, the word Nimrod might have some negative connotation. So no boy, it's for kids, shoes, no boy will wear a shoe that's called Nimrod. So those are things one needs to take into consideration. And then you also want to make sure that you can actually register it and protect it legally. So you can never choose a brand name that's actually an English word. So you can't call your brand pizza or shoe because those are words that belong to everybody and you cannot register it as unique. The next type of decision you want to make is sponsorship, meaning who actually owns the brand. So sometimes the manufacturer owns the brand, like Coke, for example, and Nike, but sometimes it's actually the retailer, the store itself, that owns the brand, which we call a private label. So Macy's, for example, have its own products. CVS have its own products. Now those private labels are usually cheaper because of the fact that those retail stores don't have to market that specific brand. They market it as part of their main brand, which is CVS, and Macy's. And they usually will create packaging, just like in this example, that are very, very similar to the real brand name. And because they own the store, they usually will place it right next to the real brand. And then consumers can look at the two and see whether they really think it's worth paying 30 or 40% more for a brand name as compared to what we call a private label. Another decision within that of who owns the brand is licensing. So many brands, Calvin Klein, Gucci, and so forth, mainly within the designer business, actually allow other companies to borrow their brand name. So for example, Gucci name or symbol might appear on belts, but Gucci actually does not manufacture these belts. Someone else does, and they pay a licensing fee for Gucci in order to use their brand name. Another type of decision is what we call co-branding. For example, United Airlines is working with the Chase Bank on their Visa card. So if you use the Visa that Chase promotes, and you buy tickets on United Airlines, you will get royalty points that later on you can use in United Airlines. FedEx and Kinko is another example. Aetna recently has joined CVS, and they're working together in order to get new consumers. Of course, in both of these decisions, the brand needs to make sure that the manufacturer who is using the licensing or the brand that they chose to work with must fit with the positioning, the image, and the target market that the original brand wants to send out to consumers. And then another decision is brand development. And this goes back to what we discussed about product lines. So we want to ask if we want to extend our brand to other products. So meaning, are we using existing brand names to create new forms, new colors, new sizes, new ingredients, and so forth? For example, when Coke started, they only had Coke, but then they had Diet Coke, and then they had Cherry Coke. Now, the advantage of such a thing is that people already know the brand. They trust the brand. Hence, when you offer a new product with the brand name, it's more likely that consumers will be less reluctant to try it. However, what happens if the new product doesn't meet expectations? What happens if consumers don't like it? It might actually kill the original brand as well. So this is not necessarily an easy decision to make. It's also used to introduce new products. Now, this is especially important when we have a buyer behavior of variety seeking. If you recall, variety seeking can happen when people have low involvement with the product and are highly experienced with the product. So a beverage industry is a good example for variety seeking, where people, yes, I like Coke, but once in a while I also want to try Sprite. So if I use more products and create the illusion of variety seeking, consumers will still buy from my company, but they will buy different types of flavors. Another reason to extend the brand is I'll have more brand coverage at retailers. It's very important, again, especially in low involvement products, that I will have a big shelf space. The more brands I can offer, the more shelf space I will get, because the retail wants to show that they have a variety of brands. And then also, it helps me to use excess capacity, meaning that a lot of companies are sort of stuck with a lot of inventory, but they do not want to reduce the price because their brand is a high-end brand. So what they will do, they will actually sell the same products under a different type of brand in order to not cannibalize on their own target market. So this is, again, just the big pictures of how the decisions are made and how one leads to the next. Now, brand extension, as we say, helps us to have an instant recognition and a faster acceptance. And it does save us the cost of building a new brand. Again, it's very important to understand building a new brand takes a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources. However, the risk, as I mentioned before, is that if it's not consistent with the rest of the brand, then it actually might hurt the original product instead of helping the new product penetration. So this is the strategies that are offered to us as marketers. So here, on one hand, we have the brand name. The brand name can be an existing one or a new one. And then the other decision is about the product category. It can be an existing one or a new one. So line extension, that will be the strategy where I already have a product category that exists in the market, and I'm actually going to use the brand name in order to offer new products. For example, like Coke and Diet Coke and Cherry Coke. Then I have a new product category, but with an existing brand name. That will be brand extension. For example, like Head & Shoulders offering now a conditioner. Then I will have an existing product category, but with a new brand name. So that will be like Sprite for the company of Coca-Cola. And then I will have new product category with new brand names, and those will be completely new brands to the company.